There are people who will never celebrate your light because it forces them to see their own darkness. You've heard the words. And here's what makes it cut so deep. Sometimes these words come from people you love, people you trusted, people who you thought would hold your joy as sacred. Instead, they hold it like evidence of your distance from them. Your growth becomes their grievance. Your peace becomes their reminder of what they haven't found. Your courage becomes their mirror, and they can't bear what it reflects. You thought sharing your victories would bring you closer. Instead, you learned to make yourself smaller just to keep the peace. You dimmed your light so they wouldn't feel overshadowed. You downplayed your gifts so they wouldn't feel inadequate. You apologized for thriving. You learned to hide your joy like a secret shame, carrying it quietly so as not to disturb the fragile comfort of those who preferred you struggling alongside them. That's the particular wound jealousy carves. It teaches you that your fullness is a burden to others, that your truth is too much, that your existence at its brightest is somehow an act of violence against those who choose to remain dim. And so you learned to fold yourself into shapes that fit other people's limitations. You became an expert at reading the room, adjusting your light, measuring your words, calibrating your presence to match the emotional capacity of whoever needed you small. But something happens when you live like that long enough. Something inside you begins to ache. A voice you tried to silence starts speaking louder. A part of you that you buried for the sake of keeping others comfortable begins to dig its way back to the surface. And you realize that the cost of being loved by people who need you diminished is the loss of yourself. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes with being celebrated only when you're struggling, when people show up for your breakdowns but vanish during your breakthroughs, when they offer shoulders to cry on but no hands to applaud with, when your pain makes you relatable, but your progress makes you unreachable. You learn who really loves you by watching who celebrates you without conditions, by noticing who can hold your joy without trying to shrink it, by seeing who stays present when you're no longer broken in ways that make them feel needed. Jealous people have a language all their own. They've mastered the art of the backhanded compliment. "You're so lucky," they say, erasing every hour you spent working in the dark. "It must be nice," they sigh, as if your blessings fell from the sky instead of rising from the soil of your own endurance. "I'm happy for you, but..." And in that pause lives everything they're not saying. In that single word, you feel the weight of their resentment dressed up as concern. They'll question your methods. Are you sure that's the right choice? Not because they care about your path, but because your confidence disturbs their doubt. They'll remind you of your past. Remember when you couldn't even, as if your history disqualifies your present. They'll predict your future. Be careful, it won't last. Planting fear where you've cultivated hope. They'll rewrite your story to make sense of their own stagnation. If you succeed, it's because you had help they didn't have. If you heal, it's because your wounds weren't as deep. If you rise, it's because you didn't have as far to climb. And the cruelest part? They'll make you feel guilty for outgrowing the version of you they were comfortable with. They'll mourn the old you, the one who was uncertain, the one who needed saving, the one who stayed small enough to make them feel big. They'll accuse you of changing as if transformation were betrayal, as if staying stuck were loyalty, as if growth were abandonment. You didn't abandon anyone. You saved yourself, and some people will never forgive you for that. There's a woman who spent years making herself invisible. She learned early that taking up space meant inviting conflict, that having needs meant being needy, that expressing wants meant being selfish. So she folded herself into the corners of other people's lives. She became an expert at reading what others required and delivering it before they even asked. She swallowed her own voice to keep the peace. She silenced her own dreams to support everyone else's, and people loved her for it. They praised her selflessness. They depended on her sacrifice. They built their comfort on the foundation of her constant self-erasure, until one day she couldn't do it anymore. Something inside her finally said enough. She started speaking. She started choosing. She started saying no. She started building a life that centered her own heartbeat instead of everyone else's. And the people who loved her diminishment called it arrogance. The people who benefited from her silence called it selfishness. The people who relied on her endless giving called her cold when she finally set boundaries. They didn't recognize her because they never really knew her. They only knew the version of her that served them. And when she stopped performing that role, they acted as if she'd committed a crime. But she hadn't changed. She'd finally become herself, and that's what they couldn't forgive. There's a child who grows up watching everyone else get chosen, gets picked last for teams, gets overlooked for opportunities, gets forgotten in group photos, watches others receive encouragement while they receive silence. They learn to expect less. They learn to make peace with leftover affection. They learn that some people are born to shine and others are born to watch. They accept this as truth until something shifts, until they realize that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless, until they understand that other people's blindness says nothing about their light. They start choosing themselves. They start celebrating their own victories in rooms where no one else claps. They start speaking their truth even when no one's listening, and slowly their voice gets stronger, their steps get steadier, their light gets brighter, and suddenly the people who never saw them before are paying attention, but not with pride, with suspicion. Who do you think you are? As if self-recognition were arrogance, as if self-worth were delusion, as if finally seeing yourself clearly were an act of hostility against everyone who preferred you blind. Then there's the person who survives what should have broken them, loss that emptied their world, betrayal that shattered their trust, grief that nearly swallowed them whole. Everyone expected them to stay in that pain, to wear it like an identity, to let it define every future moment. And for a while they did. For a while the weight of what happened was all they could carry. But slowly, impossibly, they began to heal. Not because the pain disappeared, but because they learned to hold it differently. They learned that survival doesn't mean staying wounded, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that moving forward doesn't dishonor what was lost. They learned to carry their scars with grace instead of shame, and they chose, against all odds, to open themselves to joy again. And people called it denial. They called it avoidance. They questioned whether the pain was ever real, if recovery was possible. They treated healing like betrayal, as if grief were meant to be permanent, as if resilience were proof of shallow feeling. They preferred the version who stayed broken because it made sense to them. It fit their narrative. It justified their own inability to rise. Before I continue, answer one question honestly. Have you ever dimmed your light because someone else's darkness felt more comfortable than your brightness? Have you ever apologized for thriving because someone else was still surviving? Have you ever made yourself small because your fullness made others feel insufficient? If you're still listening, something inside you is remembering who you are. There's a truth jealous people can't touch, even as they try to diminish it. Your worth isn't determined by who celebrates you. Your light doesn't dim because someone refuses to see it. Your growth isn't invalid because someone questions it. Your healing isn't false because someone doubts it. You are not required to stay small so others feel comfortable. You are not obligated to dim your light to accommodate someone else's darkness. You are not responsible for managing the insecurities of people who refuse to do their own work. You survive. you endure, you rise, not because you're special, not because you're chosen, not because you're exempt from pain, but because you decided that pain wouldn't be your entire story, because you chose to honor your own becoming even when no one else did, because you learned that waiting for permission to bloom meant staying buried forever. There's power in the pivot, in the moment you stop shrinking, in the breath you take before you speak truth that will cost you comfort, in the step you take toward your own life, even when it means walking away from people who preferred you stuck. That pivot isn't easy. It's often the hardest choice you'll ever make, because it means disappointing people. It means being misunderstood. It means being called things you're not by people who refuse to see who you are. But the alternative is betraying yourself, and that wound cuts deeper than any external judgment ever could. You learn who your people are not by who shows up during your breakdown, but by who stays during your breakthrough, by who can witness your joy without trying to qualify it, by who can hold your success without needing to diminish it, by who can watch you rise without feeling left behind. Those people are rare. Those people are gold. And when you find them, you realize that quality always matters more than quantity. That one person who genuinely celebrates you is worth more than a crowd who only tolerates you when you're struggling. Jealous people will always find reasons to discredit your journey. If you work hard, they'll call you obsessed. If you rest, they'll call you lazy. If you're confident, they'll call you arrogant. If you're humble, they'll call you weak. There's no version of you that will satisfy someone committed to misunderstanding you. So stop trying. Stop performing for an audience that will never applaud. Stop explaining yourself to people who've already decided who you are. Stop defending your joy to those who are more comfortable with your pain. Your peace is not a debate. Your worth is not up for discussion. Your growth is not subject to approval. You don't need anyone's permission to become who you were meant to be. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you stop waiting for certain people to celebrate you, when you release the expectation that everyone will understand your journey, when you accept that some relationships were only meant to last for certain seasons, when you let go of the fantasy that love means someone will always be happy for you. Some people can only love the version of you that fits their narrative. And when you outgrow that version, they treat it as betrayal. But you didn't betray them. You honored yourself. And that's not the same thing. The voices of jealous people get loud when you start living true. They question every choice. They magnify every mistake. They remind you of every failure. They predict disaster with certainty. They speak with the authority of people who know better. But what they really know is fear. What they really know is limitation. What they really know is the particular prison of their own stagnation. And your freedom terrifies them because it proves that the bars they claim are immovable are actually unlocked. You don't owe them your smallness to validate their choice to stay confined. There's a moment that comes, if you're brave enough to meet it, when you stop defending yourself, when you stop explaining, when you stop trying to make people understand what they're determined to misinterpret, when you simply live your truth and let it speak for itself. That moment feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. It feels like setting down weight you didn't realize you were carrying. It feels like coming home to yourself after a lifetime of living in exile from your own heart. And in that moment, you realize something profound. The people who were meant to celebrate you will. The people who were meant to walk beside you will. The people who were meant to understand you will. And the people who won't, they were never your people to begin with. And that's not a loss. That's clarity. Jealousy says more about the person feeling it than the person receiving it. It's a confession of internal lack, a spotlight on unhealed wounds, a symptom of comparison sickness, a signal that someone has abandoned their own journey to obsess over yours. When someone can't celebrate you, it's because they've stopped believing in their own capacity to rise. They've convinced themselves that success is finite, that there's not enough light to go around, that your shine somehow steals from theirs. But light doesn't work that way. One candle doesn't diminish another by burning bright. One flower doesn't steal from another by blooming fully. One voice doesn't silence another by speaking clearly. There's enough room for all of us to rise, enough space for all of us to shine, enough grace for all of us to become. The only people who don't believe that are the people who've stopped trying. You know what jealous people fear most? That you'll keep going, that you'll keep growing, that you'll keep rising despite their doubt, that their words won't wound you the way they intended, that their distance won't devastate you the way they hoped, that you'll find joy and peace and purpose with or without their approval. They need you to fail, to justify their own stagnation. They need you to break, to validate their own fragility. They need you to stay small, to accommodate their own refusal to expand. Don't give them that satisfaction. Rise anyway. Bloom anyway. Become anyway. There are people who will love you at your lowest and resent you at your highest. People who will hold you when you're broken and abandon you when you're whole. People who will pray for your healing and then punish you when it arrives. People who will say they want the best for you but can't handle it when you actually get it. These people aren't evil. They're human. They're wounded. They're scared. But their fear doesn't obligate your sacrifice. Their wounds don't require your stagnation. Their discomfort doesn't demand your diminishment. You can have compassion for their struggle without making it your prison. You can understand their pain without absorbing it as your responsibility. You can wish them well without staying small to keep them comfortable. Sometimes love means distance. Sometimes care means boundaries. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is stop pretending that your self-betrayal serves them. Because here's what you learn if you stay small long enough. It doesn't actually help them. Your dimness doesn't make them brighter. Your silence doesn't give them voice. Your stuckness doesn't mobilize their movement. If anything, it gives them permission to stay exactly where they are. It reinforces the lie that growth isn't possible. It validates their choice to remain fearful. Your liberation could be the catalyst for theirs, but only if you're brave enough to go first. So go first. Rise first. Speak first. Choose first. Heal first. Not from arrogance, but from necessity. Not from superiority, but from self-preservation. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to honor the life you've been given. You weren't born to make others comfortable. You were born to become fully yourself. And that becoming will always disturb those who've chosen to stay sleeping. Let them be disturbed. Let them question. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Let them resent. Let them turn away. Their response is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own truth, your own growth, your own becoming, your own joy, your own peace, your own life. And here's what happens when you finally choose yourself without apology. When you stop shrinking to fit other people's comfort, when you stop silencing yourself to keep the peace, when you stop dimming your light to accommodate someone else's darkness, you discover that the cost of other people's approval was your own soul. You realize that the price of staying small was everything you were meant to become. You understand that the only betrayal that matters is the one you commit against yourself. You also discover who really loves you, because the people who genuinely care will celebrate your expansion, not mourn your transformation. They'll witness your growth with pride, not resentment. They'll hold space for your becoming, not demand you return to who you were. They'll understand that loving someone means wanting them to become fully themselves, even if that version looks nothing like what they expected. And the people who can't do that, they never loved you. They loved their idea of you. They loved what you did for them. They loved how you made them feel. They loved the role you played in their story. But they didn't love you, because love doesn't require smallness. Love doesn't demand diminishment. Love doesn't punish growth. Real love makes room. Real love celebrates. Real love rises with you, not against you. So when jealous people reveal themselves through their words, through their silence, through their sudden distance, through their subtle sabotage, believe them. Don't make excuses. Don't convince yourself you're reading it wrong. Don't blame yourself for their discomfort. Don't apologize for your light. Don't shrink to make them feel bigger. Don't silence your truth to accommodate their lies. Don't betray your becoming to preserve a relationship that only worked when you were broken. Let them go, not with bitterness, not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity, with boundaries, with self-respect, with dignity. Let them go with the understanding that some people are only meant to be part of your story for a season, that some relationships exist to teach you what you deserve and what you don't, that some connections are training grounds for discernment, showing you who's worthy of your trust and who isn't. And then turn toward your life. Turn toward the people who celebrate you without conditions. Turn toward the work that calls you. Turn toward the dreams that won't let you sleep. Turn toward the version of yourself that's been waiting for permission to emerge. Turn toward the light you've been taught to dim. Turn toward the voice you've been taught to silence. Turn toward the truth you've been taught to hide. Turn toward yourself fully, finally, unapologetically, because here's what jealous people will never understand. You're not rising against them. You're rising for yourself. Your growth isn't commentary on their stagnation. Your healing isn't judgment of their wounds. Your joy isn't mockery of their pain. Your becoming isn't an attack on their staying. You're simply choosing to live, to grow, to evolve, to expand, to become. And if that makes them uncomfortable, that's information about where they are, not where you should be. You don't have to stay in the darkness to keep someone else company. You don't have to remain wounded to validate someone else's pain. You don't have to stay small to make someone else feel adequate. You don't have to silence your truth to protect someone else's lies. You don't have to dim your light to accommodate someone else's preference for shadows. You are allowed to bloom. You are allowed to rise. You are allowed to speak. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to become more. You are allowed to grow beyond who you were. You are allowed to outgrow places, beliefs, and people that no longer serve your highest good. You are allowed to choose yourself without guilt. You are allowed to prioritize your peace without explanation. You are allowed to protect your joy without apology. You are allowed to live fully, freely, loudly, brightly, authentically. And when jealous people try to dim that light with their words, with their doubt, with their judgment, with their distance, remember this: their words are not truth. Their perception is not reality. Their limitations are not your ceiling. Their fear is not your compass. Their journey is not your responsibility. You owe them nothing but honesty, and the most honest thing you can do is keep going. Keep growing, keep rising, keep blooming, keep speaking, keep choosing yourself, keep becoming who you were always meant to be. Let your life be the answer to their doubt. Let your joy be the response to their bitterness. Let your peace be the rebuttal to their chaos. Let your growth be the evidence that their limitations were never universal truths, just personal choices. And one day, if you're lucky, you'll look back at this moment when you almost made yourself small again to keep someone comfortable, this moment when you almost silenced yourself to keep the peace, this moment when you almost dimmed your light to avoid casting shadows. And you'll be grateful you didn't. You'll be grateful you chose yourself. You'll be grateful you kept going. You'll be grateful you trusted your own voice more than their doubt. You'll be grateful you believed in your own worth more than their judgment. You'll be grateful you lived, not the half-life of constant accommodation, not the shadow existence of perpetual self-erasure, not the muted version of yourself that fit other people's comfort zones, but the full, vibrant, authentic, unapologetic version, the version that speaks truth, the version that takes up space, the version that shines without permission, the version that rises without apology, the version that becomes without explanation. That version has always been you, the real you, the true you, the you that existed before the world taught you to shrink, before jealous people convinced you that your light was a problem, before you learned to mistake self-betrayal for love, before you accepted that your fullness was too much. That version is still here, still waiting, still calling, still hoping you'll finally stop performing for audiences who will never truly see you and start living for the one person whose approval actually matters, yours. So here's what you do when jealous people speak their poison, when they try to plant doubt where you've cultivated certainty, when they try to dim light you've worked hard to keep burning, when they try to make you small again after you've fought to expand, when they try to silence truth you've finally found courage to speak. You listen to yourself instead. You trust your own voice. You honor your own knowing. You protect your own peace. You choose your own joy. You celebrate your own victories. You validate your own journey. You speak your own truth. And you keep moving forward, not because you need to prove anything to anyone, but because you finally learned that betraying yourself to accommodate others is the cruelest choice you could ever make. You keep going, despite their words, despite their doubt, despite their judgment, despite their distance, despite their resentment, despite their envy. You keep going because your life isn't about them. It never was. It was always about you, about your growth, about your healing, about your becoming, about your joy, about your peace, about your truth, about your light. And that light, it doesn't need anyone's permission to shine. It doesn't require anyone's approval to exist. It doesn't depend on anyone's validation to matter. It simply is, constant, true, yours, and no amount of jealous words can extinguish what burns from within. So let them talk, let them doubt, let them judge, let them turn away. And you just keep shining, keep rising, keep blooming, keep becoming, keep living, not in spite of them, but beyond them, because your life was never about proving anything to people who've already decided not to see you. Your life is about honoring yourself, fully, finally, completely. And that, more than anything else, is what jealous people fear most. Not that you'll succeed, but that you'll do it without needing their approval, that you'll rise without seeking their validation, that you'll become fully yourself and realize you never needed them to give you permission, that your joy will be complete without them, that your peace will be profound without them, that your life will be full without them. They fear your independence, your self-sufficiency, your self-love, your self-celebration, because it exposes the lie they've been telling themselves, that they need external validation to matter, that they need someone else's approval to exist, that they need to tear others down to feel elevated. You're proving that none of that is true, and it terrifies them. So keep proving it, not to convince them, but to free yourself. Keep choosing you. Keep celebrating you. Keep honoring you. Keep rising as you. Keep speaking as you. Keep becoming fully, completely, unapologetically you, because that's the greatest gift you can give yourself, and that's the most powerful response to jealousy.